Well, folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. We have got some stories for you that will give you information that other people don't have, I believe, in terms of some of the insights behind the headlines of things that happened in whether it's some elections in the U.S. that have shocked people. You're going to hear about the mosque in Regina, Canada, that is now blasting out through its loudspeakers the call to prayer. You're going to hear about our friend Clavicular. Remember him, the guy, the looks-maxing guy, kind of having some interesting dating problems in Paris, and lots more. Stay tuned right now. Here it is. I talked to you yesterday. We looked at the fact that there was going to be a real test about the influence of one of our favorite mayors, the New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani, and he was supporting three particular candidates. This is candidates that were running in for the Democratic Party nomination in three different areas to see who would carry the flag for the Democrats in the upcoming elections in November. All three of the ones that he supported scored big victories, and all the headlines today are that Mayor Mamdani from New York is probably the biggest influencer now in the Democrat Party. This is getting very interesting because the candidates that he endorses that wind up winning are seen as severely left-wing, way out there, socialist, definitely anti-Israel, and trending to the younger voter. So he's getting huge attention there. Kind of an interesting story too, because the House Minority Leader, which is a pretty important position in the political parties in the U.S., the House Minority Leader for the Democrats, his name is Hakeem Jeffries. You've heard about him. Apparently, the only way he survived a nomination test or challenge was that he cut a deal with Zoran Mamdani to actually make sure that he wouldn't get challenged. So it looks like people are coming hat in hand to the mayor, Zoran Mamdani of New York City, and seeing what he might be able to do for them. This is very interesting development on this, and writers and commentators are now saying that Mamdani and also the Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's a Democrat, she's from New York, AOC as she is known, are looking at being now the two major forces of influence within the Democrat Party. Even speculation that AOC may run for president. We'll see how that is all going to go. And there's even talk about so-called middle-of-the-road Democrats. You'll know John Fetterman, of course, is somebody who is, he's a senator, and he actually appears moderate and appears fairly normal in his thinking, sometimes votes with the Republicans, sometimes not. And there's even suggestions he might want to be looking to switch to the Republican Party. That's a rumor, we don't know, but it shows the strength of the far left really gaining in the Democrat Party in the United States. Well, you saw after the Knicks game, those basketball fans from around the world, and the New York Knicks winning the NBA title, and everybody quite excited about that. It was actually an amazing series. And following that, there were huge riots in New York. New York Knicks fans being somewhat notorious for, instead of just cheering after a game, they like to blow things up and set things on fire and destroy things. That's in New York. That's the New York Knicks fans. Well, some people have been charged, quite rightly as they should be, for the havoc and the violence that they created following the New York Knicks win and following the parade. And very interesting, there were scenes that were showing on news of the destruction. And one was of a woman just taking a giant garbage pail and dumping out garbage and just throwing it all around the street. Well, in this day of cameras and identification, it's kind of too bad for her. Her name, she's been identified, her name is Angie Baez. And what's interesting here, she's a 40-year-old financial industry executive, but more than that, she's head of the DEI program, the very woke program for the huge investment house JP Morgan Chase. Matter of fact, she is executive. Her previous work and some of the ongoing work includes serving as executive director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I guess she was hoping to include garbage within her posting as being head of diversity and equity for JP Morgan. Needless to say, she's looking for work today. Not a very good look. Well, in terms of another U.S. story that's emerging and pointing across the ocean to Great Britain, to the U.K., we've got Harry, so-called Prince Harry, is heading over to the U.K. and he's bringing his kids. He's bringing Archie and Lilibet, and the rumor is that he's going to be looking at a reconciliation with his bro, with Prince William. He says no, it's just because he wants the king, the dad, King Charles, the grandpa to see the grandkids, but there's going to be a lot of swirling on that. Will he actually reconcile with Prince William? Let's jump back to the U.S. just for a minute, because you saw first here on this podcast, we talked about the state of Arkansas and how they, in 2024, began to overhaul their whole way in which they were looking at public school teaching. And they came up with something called the Arkansas Teaching, Learning, and Assessment System. We talked about that and how it has a real focus on testing, and it has a real focus on performance-based pay for teachers, and how that the results after 2 years are rocking the nation, showing huge increase in proficiency scores among students. So we covered that, but what's interesting here, they've been interviewing other people from around the nation on that particular development, using this so-called new approach to teaching, expecting proficiency, expecting people to do well, and paying teachers who do better than other teachers. So they've gotten some comments from school boards around the nation. The Iowa school board member by the name of Rachel Wall, she doesn't like the whole new approach, and she says, quote, "The purpose of public education is to not teach kids what the parents want. It's to teach them what we think society needs them to know." And this school board official goes on to say, the client is not the parent, it's the community. So showing, just kind of drawing the lines between people who think parents should have a say and the other philosophy within school boards, and seems to be prevailing, is that parents should not have anything to say. There's state representative from Wisconsin said if parents want to have a say in their child's education, then they should just go and do homeschool or pay for private school tuition out of their family budget. So showing reaction, not a lot of happy reaction from teachers' unions and those who represent teachers' unions in the U.S. relative to this focus on kids learning, kids developing, kids being proficient in tests, and parents being involved. Apparently, a lot of the teacher union types don't like that. Well, the beautification process goes on in Washington, D.C. If you've been to Washington, D.C., it's a beautiful city, but definitely any of those of us, as I have been over there for down there the last few years or several years, there's definitely been signs of decay among the buildings and things that need to be beautified. And that's, of course, been a major focus of the White House, is those beautification processes. And people, even Democrats, are starting to say, you know what, the place is looking better. We do have to recognize that. And those celebrations are coming up pretty quickly. President Trump going to Washington, D.C. today, and this isn't on for the purpose of beautification, but is going to be a big leader, or a big meeting, I should say, with the Republican representatives. Some are calling it a showdown because he really wants to see the Save America Act. This is called Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility. Save America, Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility. And it's a law. It's actually reinforcing what has been the case in the past, but has largely been ignored. And that's making sure that anybody who votes has to have proof of their citizenship, some way to prove that they're actually citizens. That's always been the way it was. but that's largely been flaunted in past years. And some of the Republicans getting a little nervous about that bill because in their constituencies, they have large numbers of people who aren't, in fact, citizens, but still somehow manage to vote. And they're worried about losing the vote of those, ironically, who can't vote. So it's going to be a bit of a test for Donald Trump in terms of does he have the support of the Republicans in general. If you're people, if you're kind of interested in this whole area of UFOs, and as you know, they've the issue is always an interesting one, but increasingly so. A recent documentary called "The Age of Disclosure," and that had a real focus on the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and some other members of Congress, and talking about do they know about UFOs? Are there things being hidden? And that documentary has become Amazon Prime's best-selling documentary. And that happened within 48 hours of its release. And that has really kind of triggered, it's just being used to show and highlight how this area of so-called UFOs is gripping more and more people. You may be interested if you really want to be appearing to be savvy about this. They're not calling them UFOs anymore, unidentified flying objects. They're called unidentified aerial phenomena. They're called UAPs. Did you catch that? Unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. So when your friends or neighbors say, hey, what do you think about all this stuff on UFOs? You just kind of roll your eyes a bit and say, oh, do you mean UAPs? Anyway, getting the increase in interest just continues to rocket upward. We'll see where that all goes and to see if there's any, in fact, terrestrials that are flying around. There's a trend in the courts of dealing with these situations where people of faith, mainly this would be of the Christian community, who have not wanted to become involved in certain things that are required from them at work, have been fired from jobs or been sued. And a series of interesting court rulings and decisions are showing that, at least in the U.S., the courts are leaning towards religious rights over the rights of people who get offended. Recent reading, Rachel DeGides covers this in her column. A judge has awarded $640,000 to a judge who had said she does be a local judge, did not want to officiate same-sex weddings, said this was against her beliefs, and she was fired and sued and everything else, and took that to court, and the judge has awarded her $640,000 and said if it's against your religious beliefs, you in fact don't have to do those weddings. That's been a very interesting one. Of course, the recent Supreme Court ruling, which strikes down, Colorado had a ban on something called conversion therapy. You remember conversion therapy is something that was identified a number of years ago, back 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Apparently, some practitioners in dealing with people who felt they were homosexual but didn't want to be homosexual, and so they would go for therapy. And and it was only in rare cases, but in some cases they used electric shock treatments to deal with that situation. Not something that would be advisable, I wouldn't think, at any time. And that was called then conversion therapy. And as you know, evolving from that was anything or any kind of discussion. If somebody was uncomfortable dealing with, they felt they had same-sex attraction issues and they wanted to talk about that, there could be no discussion permitted in therapy at all in terms of anything but full-scale, wholesale acceptance of what they were feeling. And even if a therapist was said, well, let's talk about it, maybe you should take a second look at this, maybe you should reconsider, maybe you in fact aren't, quote, a homosexual or gay. Even that was included as conversion therapy, and many jurisdictions, Canada for sure, and the United States, were banning any kind of approach other than full wholesale acceptance of the feelings a person was having. That was called conversion therapy, and many jurisdictions were developing laws against it. Therapists were being couldn't even raise the issue and have a broad discussion on it. And with the Supreme Court struck down Colorado's ban on conversion therapy for LGBTQ youth, this would be young people who were saying they were having certain feelings, and were they in fact the same gender in which they were born. And you were being, if you're a therapist, you were being charged or fired or thrown in jail or threatened with jail for talking about the choices there. And so that ban on conversion therapy was struck down. Another seen as a plus for religious freedoms. And in Louisville has been ordered to pay. There's a situation there where a Christian photographer who did not want to be forced to have to shoot same-sex weddings in her business. She would refer clients who were interested in that to other videographers who would do it. And she got into all kinds of trouble with the law, and courts have ordered that she be paid $800,000 because of those trying to force her to do things against her religious beliefs. So interesting to see where that is all going. Well, all eyes continue to be on Iran and the situation there. There's a lot of turmoil politically in the U.S. that Donald Trump has backed off, should have crushed Iran, should not be allowing oil to flow, etc. The other competing interest that wasn't getting a lot of attention, and the Wall Street Journal talks about it, is that China was in there and making dollars, or well, not dollars, their own currency, which is the yuan, that's spelled Y-U-A-N, helping Iran. So in fact, it's not quite as simple as just shutting off U.S. dollars to Iran, because China was in there luring them anyway. And maybe part of the reason that the White House and Trump has said, look, we've got peace there now, the straits are open, and the sanctions against them should stop as we negotiate over the next 60 days. So we're seeing how that goes. But China definitely in the mix in terms of luring Iran over to their side. Well, in the ongoing debate about the cost of homes and why new homes can't get built, and in fact why high-priced homes, or homes that seem to be overly priced, aren't selling, and in real estate news and news and trends, an article by Tristan Navera showing that capital gains taxes actually discourage homeowners from selling their homes, and that was presented to the Senate, and making a very solid case that governments, of course, politicians, always finding ways, looking for ways to tax people. We all are familiar with capital gains tax. If you sell your home, you make a profit. Depending on what jurisdiction you're in, then you can pay a pretty big tax on that profit. And so people who are holding onto their homes are thinking, if I sell it, I want to get a certain price. Let's say it's $1 million. I want to get $1 million, but I bought the home for $800,000. And I'm going to pay capital gains tax on the profit. That's on $200,000. Then they become reluctant to sell their homes. They don't want to drop the value of the home. They don't want to sell it. They're stuck in a quagmire. And in fact, thousands and thousands of homes in fact, tens of thousands of homes are not selling. This is a U.S. study, are not selling. And in fact, not bringing more homes onto the market. Is it the only reason there's a shortage? Of a so-called shortage of housing? No, but it is a clear factor. Greedy governments slapping capital gains tax, it actually backfires on those governments. The homes don't sell, and it does not help the problem of homes being made available. So interesting to see how that goes. In Political Magazine today, out of New York, it's also commenting in terms of movement of homes and people possibly moving. Again, elections matter, and with the elections, the three people that were, as I just talked about earlier, elected, the Democrats that won their nominations are all anti-Israel, along with being anti a number of other things. And this is in the city of the most heavily Jewish city in the United States. That's having a factor, and people there looking at selling their homes and moving. This is obviously Jewish people, as the atmosphere in New York becomes increasingly negative towards them. It's something to keep in mind that these Democrats who are winning their nomination battles, they all trend severely, significantly anti-Israel. Well, you'll remember a while ago, and you heard it here, we talked about a trend, this trend called max influencing, and maxing your good looks. And the Kirsten Murray has a report on this. She's a senior reporter for Show Business. And you'll remember our friend, our buddy that we talked about, he calls himself Clavicular. It's actually, his real name is Braden Peters, but Clavicular, he was the guy, those of you who are regular listeners and watchers, who talked all about doing anything you possibly can to make your face look better. This is as a man. He even talked about using a hammer to make his chin look different. And anyway, taking things to the extreme, but he's got a huge following, Clavicular does, in terms of how to look good and how to mog people. Mogging, of course, is being seen standing beside someone else and you are getting the attention because you're simply looking better. Well, he took his show and video to Paris, and he made the round of the bars there to try and show how amazingly attractive and gorgeous he was. And unfortunately for him, everybody he approached, showed him approaching different young women in the bars. He flamed out at every single attempt. He tried using some of his best lines, and it just didn't work. So watch Clavicular, watch to see if he starts to lose followers, because it's usually young men who've been following him by the millions, actually, and now they got to see him on screen flaming out in Paris in the bars. We'll see what happens. Well, young people in India, again, showing the power of Gen Z in terms of becoming a voting force. There's a party that's emerged, and they're actually calling themselves the Cockroaches, because India's chief justice had made a kind of a negative comment about Gen Zs not being able to find work and getting nervous about that. And so the new party is called actually the Cockroach Party. And the leader of that party, his name is Abhijit Dipki. And Susan Ormiston is writing about this. Very interesting, getting huge amounts of support, but not just on that, but the fact that in India, it's huge because there is such a premium that is placed by parents on education, especially in the sciences, technology, engineering, and people who were thousands and thousands who were writing the medical exam, the test for the medical exam, that had to be taken back because of some flaws in the exam itself. And so everybody was told they had to write again. Writing for this exam brings huge pressure. It's a real sweat time for students who are writing that exam. So that added to the battle cry of the Cockroach Party, and they continue to gain in popularity. We'll see if they will be able to sway the different policies in governments across India. Well, in Canada, and we touched on it first here before it was again in mainstream news, there was the mosque, or is a mosque in Regina, and the controversy continues to go as they have been using a loudspeaker. They said first it was a test, but now City Council says it's going to be actually allowed at least one day a week. They'll be able to use the loudspeaker across the city of Regina to call faithful Islamic followers to prayer, and that continues to get all kinds of attention. Let's watch where that one goes, but you did hear it first here at StockwellDay.com, day-to-day news. So let's watch where that goes. Well, on the projects that are being announced as getting priority for federal funding, a new Northwest Territories highway. Watch for that announcement. It's called the Mackenzie Valley Highway. Now, I've lived in the Arctic. I've lived in Inuvik. I lived up there before there was a highway up there, and then the so-called Dempster Highway opened, which was a very positive thing. But this is a tricky territory to build highways in. This will be coming from another area, and it will be linking some of the communities like Norman Wells and other communities, 800 kilometers long. I actually think it's a tremendous thing, a huge boost to the north, and watch for that to be announced. Tourism will actually be a real factor there, where you'll be able to, as you can with the Dempster Highway now, though it's sometimes in rough shape, actually tour the marvels and the fantastic nature of Canada's Arctic. You can get up there by car, now even more so with this announcement. Watch for that to come out. Another announcement that has got people's attention, and this has been covered in a Canadian newspaper in the National Post, that it's always, Israel always gets accused of killing hundreds of journalists. And you see their bodies and they get named, and a lot of criticism, of course, on that charge, which they have always denied. And now there has been a very recent release by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That's the PIJ group. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been releasing hundreds of names of terrorists who have been killed in the war in Gaza. And now that these lists get double checked, and they've been checked by the Committee to Protect Journalists called the CPJ, it was found that many of the names of the terrorists were actually on the same list as those who were purporting to be journalists. And that's caused huge embarrassment by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's an admission that many of the people that they called journalists and had registered as journalists were in fact terrorists. A pretty unnerving thing that a journalist who usually has a pass to get into areas that other people can't, especially in times of conflict, have been doing that. So that is creating some embarrassment on behalf of Hamas and Palestinian Jihad. We'll see where that particular discussion will go. Well, there's an interesting article in the Harvard Health School, and Jessica Brody is the author there, and she's asked the question, it's getting a lot of attention: would Jesus prioritize self-care? There's a lot of talk about self-care, of course, and there's some concern and criticism that it's resulting in too much focus on one's own self, just for the purpose of advancing oneself, maybe in terms of fashion or whatever it might be. So been a lot of discussion and promotion about healthcare. And the author writes, well, yes, Jesus himself was conscious about his own health. But it's interesting the angle she takes, because she points out a number of things. She says, for instance, Jesus regularly withdrew from crowds to pray. So whereas many people want self-care and also being able to look amazing so they can look good to the crowds, he would pull away from the crowds because it would become wearying. He realized he needed to pray. Jesus expressed emotions openly. That's an area of self-care, as in the form of a man. For instance, he wept at Lazarus' tomb. He showed anger at one point, it was righteous anger, of course, when he was in the temple and he saw all the people just selling stuff and making money in the temple. And of course, his anguish he poured out in tears in the Garden of Gethsemane. So she goes on to say that, yes, this is a healthy thing. Jesus expressed emotions openly, and he rested when he was tired. She notes that Jesus, a number of times, especially the famous incident in the boat and the walking on water, what was Jesus doing? He was sleeping. He was taking care of himself. So, and then she concludes her article by saying self-care is a good thing, especially if it's for the purpose of strengthening you to be even more effective at helping others. There you go, folks. A little bit of self-care for the day. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you tomorrow.